Snow drifted down in slow, weighty flakes outside the Frost Hollow Pack's stronghold, glazing the stone walls in a pale, ghostly shimmer. Inside, heat wrapped the halls like a blanket, candles burning in golden chandeliers, while the scent of pine and roasted meat lingered thick in the air. Servants rushed up and down the staircase, arms crowded with linens trays and bottles of wine. That night's ball wasn't just a celebration, it was survival, dressed up in silk and music. Riva stood before her mirror, trying to steady the slight tremor in her reflection as her maid tightened the laces of her gown. The dress glimmered softly, silver threads woven through deep blue fabric. Her father had ordered the gown weeks ago, long before revealing the real reason why. "Hold still." Luna-to-be, her maid, teased quietly, smiling as she tied the final ribbon. "I'm not anyone's Luna yet," Riva murmured, attempting humor she didn't feel. The word Luna pressed on her, too heavy, too distant, something meant for older, wiser women, not for her. But Eldrick insisted this was her responsibility. When the maid slipped out, her father entered. Alpha Eldrick still carried the presence of the warrior he once had been, though streaks of gray threaded his beard. His expression tonight wasn't pride, it was worry wrapped in calm. "You look like your mother," he said after a moment. "She would have been nervous too," Riva replied, pushing a small laugh past the knot in her throat. He stepped in, adjusting the pendant resting at her neck. "You know why we're doing this?" Riva met his gaze in the mirror. "Because the rogues are growing bolder, and no pack stands alone anymore." He exhaled slowly, his reflection meeting hers. "The South can help us. Dracon's pack is strong, disciplined. This marriage will keep our borders safe. And if it doesn't," she whispered. He hesitated. "Then we'll find another way. But right now, this is our best chance." He rested a warm, steady hand on her shoulder. "I wouldn't ask this of you if I didn't believe it was right." Riva turned and hugged him. He rarely showed affection, but tonight he held her close. "I'll make you proud. I know you will." By nightfall, the courtyard filled with carriages and the crisp bite of snow. The Alliance Ball had begun. Lanterns lit the path, guiding guests toward the great hall where the packs would gather. From the balcony, Riva watched arrivals, alphas and betas, from nearby territories in their finest attire. The air vibrated with tension, wrapped in polite smiles. Then the deep blast of horns echoed through the valley. The southern pack had arrived. Their banners were unlike anything Frost Hollow ever displayed, black cloth marked with a chained silver wolf, fierce, even in restraint. The men riding under it were sharp and rigid in posture, their armor catching what little light the snow offered. At the front rode Alpha Dracon. He dismounted in one fluid motion, snow crunching beneath heavy boots. He was taller than most in the courtyard and held himself with a quiet, controlled confidence instead of arrogance. His coat lined with dark fur framed shoulders, made for war. But when he glanced up at her balcony, something in his expression softened. Riva's breath stuttered when their eyes met. Her father greeted him first, exchanging formal titles as the cold air carried their voices. When Dracon found Riva again, he dipped his head slightly, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "So this is the Alpha's daughter," he said, voice smooth and unwavering, "the one who holds the North's heart." Eldrick chuckled. "And the one who refuses to sit still." Riva descended the steps, her gown brushing the snow. When she reached Dracon, she bowed her head politely. "Welcome to Frost Hollow, Alpha." He studied her with open admiration, no trace of impropriety. "Please, just Dracon. Titles make us sound like our fathers." She smiled, caught off guard by his ease. "Then welcome, Dracon." For the first time that week, Eldrick smiled too. The ball unfolded with laughter, wine and music echoing through the vaulted ceilings. Riva tried playing her part, watching Dracon from afar. He was surrounded by men from other packs, listening intently, commanding with calm authority. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod. She quickly looked away, pretending to sip her drink. Later, when the music softened, he approached. "You've avoided me all night," he said lightly. "I didn't know that was a crime," she replied, playful, but cautious. "Only if you're my future Luna." She blinked, startled. He said it so effortlessly, as though the idea wasn't new to him. His confidence wasn't forceful, just sure, like he already knew the ending to the story. "Then maybe I should make up for it," she said, placing her hand in his. They stepped onto the floor just as the musicians lifted the melody again. The crowd watched them closely. Whispers drifting through the air like smoke, but Riva forgot them almost instantly. Draken moved with sharp confidence, every step practiced and controlled. He didn't shove her into the rhythm or try to dominate the moment. He simply guided her. "You're not what I expected," he murmured. "And what exactly did you expect?" "Someone who drops her eyes when spoken to," he replied. "You look straight at me." Riva lifted a brow. "Would you rather I didn't?" He let out a low, genuine laugh. "No, don't stop. It suits you." The comment sent a warmth through her that unsettled her more than she liked. When the dance ended, he didn't release her hand right away. "I'll admit something," he said, his voice dipping lower. "I thought this alliance would be nothing but politics, but maybe it could turn into more." Rivas searched his expression for deceit and found none. He looked sincere, gentle even. For the first time, a spark of hope flickered, an idea that this union might become something real. As midnight approached, the elders moved to the head of the hall. The conversations around them faded. Candle flames wavered as two silver daggers and a scroll were carried forward, the alliance contract bound with crimson ribbon and sealed with wax. Eldrick spoke the words of unity, his voice echoing across the chamber. "By the blood of our alphas and the bond of the moon, let this union bring peace between North and South." Draken turned toward her and extended his hand. "Together." She nodded, her palms settling into his. They each drew a thin line across their skin, letting a drop of blood fall onto the parchment. The wax shimmered when their marks touched. A stir rippled through the crowd. The bond was sealed. Eldrick's shoulders lowered, a long breath leaving him. "It is done," he said softly, relief filling his tone. "The packs stand united." When Riva looked toward Drakon, he smiled again, steady, self-assured, comforting. "You did something extraordinary tonight," he told her. "You protected your people. Be proud of that." She offered a faint smile. "I'll feel proud when peace actually comes." "It will," he said. And though his voice was calm, there was an iron certainty behind it. The next morning, the world seemed transformed. The snowfall had stopped, and sunlight spilled over the courtyard, turning it into a field of glittering white. Horses were saddled, their breath curling in the cold air. Draken's men secured the final crates to the carriages, while Eldrick gave instructions to his beta. When Riva appeared wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, people turned to watch. Eldrick walked her to the carriage himself. "You've done your duty," he said quietly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Now go and live well, and remember, you're my daughter, before you're anyone's Luna." She held him tightly longer than she intended. "I'll make you proud. You already have." When she turned to Drakon, he held out his gloved hand, smiling. "Shall we?" She took his hand, pulse racing, but steady. "We shall." The carriage doors closed, and with Drakon's signal, the convoy rolled forward. Snow shook free from the trees as they traveled, and slowly the white wilderness faded into rolling hills and bare winter fields. Hours blurred into days. The cold eased into warmer air. The scent changed earthier, heavier. When the carriage finally halted, Riva leaned toward the window and gasped. Rising before them was the Nightspire Pack's fortress, a vast stronghold of black stone and red banners, sunlight gleaming off its towers. Dozens of soldiers stood in formation at the gate, severe, unfamiliar, but strangely beautiful. As she stepped out, she noticed the silence. Every servant bowed deeply, eyes pinned to the ground. No one spoke. "They're showing respect," Drakon said beside her. "To you or to me?" she asked. He gave a faint smile. "To both of us, Luna." Something in his tone stirred her chest, half warmth, half nerves. He offered his arm. "Welcome home." She smiled lightly, unaware of the weight those words would someday carry. The first days in the south felt like wandering through someone else's dream. The sun seemed warmer, the air heavier, and everything smelled of cedar and dust. The Nightspire Pack's stronghold stretched endlessly, its towering walls and quiet courtyard, built with the cold precision of a fortress rather than a home. To Riva it felt both majestic and unsettlingly empty. Her chamber overlooked the gardens, though only a few flowers pushed through the soil there. Those few blossoms were trimmed into rigid lines, as if even nature itself had been commanded to obey. Still, she tried to appreciate what beauty she could find. She reminded herself that unfamiliar places always felt harsh at first. Change was always jarring. Draken, meanwhile, remained attentive, almost disarmingly so. He seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. When she awoke her first morning, an entirely new wardrobe awaited her. Soft silk dresses, perfectly fitted shoes, jewelry that caught the light like liquid amber. At breakfast, he asked if she'd slept well, if the food suited her, if the servants were treating her properly. He looked every bit the considerate mate. For a moment, Riva wondered if she had been wrong to fear him. One morning, he invited her to tour the estate. The halls were lined with portraits of the Vale bloodline alphas from generations past, each painted with the same stern eyes and rigid stance of command. Their Luna stood beside them, always serene, always beautiful, always positioned a step behind. When Riva paused at a portrait where the Luna's face had been violently scratched out, Drakon spoke quickly. "That one fell during a storm. The damage was never repaired." He said it too fast, too neatly, as though rehearsed. They moved on. Beyond the walls stretched the lands of the south, rolling fields, stables, training yards, filled with shouts. From a balcony, Riva watched rows of men spar with blunt weapons, their movements sharp and disciplined. "You train them well," she said. "Are your female warriors stationed somewhere else?" He turned, startled. "Female warriors? Yes. In my pack, several serve. Some guard our borders, some even lead patrols." A faint smile touched his lips. The North always did things differently. That wasn't an answer. He looked back down at the men. "Women here have other duties, no less important." His tone was calm, not cruel, but final. A tone that left no room for questioning. Riva let it drop, though unease pricked at her stomach. At dinner, she spotted details she hadn't before. No women sat at the long tables. Only men. The servants pouring wine moved like shadows, eyes glued to the floor. When Riva offered a gentle smile to one girl, the servant's hands trembled violently, nearly spilling the tray. "Are they not allowed to join us?" Riva asked. "They eat afterward," Drakon replied easily. "It's tradition. Tradition." He said it like it justified everything. Later that night, after most of the pack had retired, Riva wandered the halls alone. The corridors were wide and dimly lit, carrying the faint scent of burning oil. She drifted toward the courtyard again. Moonlight washed the stones in pale silver painting, the night in quiet calm. She inhaled deeply and closed her eyes. For a moment, the world felt peaceful. Then she heard it, two hushed voices behind a pillar. "She doesn't know yet," one woman whispered. Quiet, the other hissed. "If he hears you," Riva stepped forward. "If who hears you?" Both women froze. Their aprons marked them as kitchen servants. One bowed so deeply, her hair brushed the ground. "Forgive us, Luna. We shouldn't have spoken." "You can tell me," Riva said gently. "What is it I don't know?" The women exchanged a terrified look. Then one whispered, "Please." Just be careful before they disappeared into the shadows. Riva stood there long after they left, staring at the moon. The peace she'd felt moments earlier was gone. When she returned to her room, Drakon stood at the window, as if he'd been waiting. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. "The guards don't know your scent yet. They may mistake you for an intruder." "I only needed some air," she replied. "Then wake me next time. I'll walk with you." It sounded like a kind offer, but the tone beneath it said it wasn't optional. The days passed quiet and strange. Drakon was never openly cruel, but small things unsettled her. The way servants stiffened when he entered. How conversations died the moment he passed. How even his betas seemed to weigh every word in his presence. Once she complimented the roast served at dinner and mentioned she wanted to thank the cook. Drakon smiled and said, "There's no need. They don't expect praise. Serving well is all that matters." Another time Riva spotted a young girl hauling a bucket of water down the hall, struggling under the weight. When Riva reached out to help, the girl nearly dropped it in fear. "Please, Luna," she whispered. "You can't." "Can't what?" Riva asked. The girl's gaze fell to the floor. "Touch our work." One afternoon, a storm swept down from the mountains. Rain hammered the windows while thunder shook the stone walls. Riva stood on the balcony watching the downpour blur the gardens into gray. Drakon stepped beside her, his tone light. "By morning the sky will clear. Storms never stay long here." Riva offered a faint smile. "That must be nice." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to read something hidden in her face. "You're still adjusting. It takes time. My pack is different from yours. I noticed." He chuckled softly and turned to leave. "Different doesn't mean bad." "No," she said, though her voice softened. "It doesn't." That night sleep refused to come. The thunder had quieted, but her thoughts wouldn't. She drifted toward the window and pulled the curtains aside. Below in the courtyard, 2 guards paced their patrol, silent, synchronized like shadows. The gate beyond them remained shut, thick iron bars gleaming faintly in the rain. She realized she had never once seen it open since her arrival. She watched the torches flicker along the walls, a chill running through her. She had come here willingly, but the longer she stayed, the smaller her freedom felt. At breakfast the next morning, she forced herself to shake it off. She smiled, asked polite questions, pretended not to notice the way servants flinched whenever Drakon spoke. When he mentioned an upcoming ceremony to officially welcome her as Luna, she pushed enthusiasm into her voice. "When will it be?" "At the next full moon," he said. "You'll stand beside me before the pack. It's sacred." He brushed her hand lightly. "You'll be magnificent." And she believed him, or wanted to. His charm had a way of dulling the warnings in her mind. But when she glanced toward the doorway, she saw Vea, the aging housekeeper, wringing her hands. Her eyes flicked to Riva, full of warning. Then Vea bowed and slipped away before Drakon could turn. That night Riva dreamt again of the scratched portrait. The faceless Luna's body seemed to stir beneath the paint. The hand lifted, pointing towards something unseen, whispering in a voice barely there. Riva jolted awake, heart pounding. She crossed the room and pushed open the balcony doors. Cool night air swept over her. The courtyard lay below, washed in pale moonlight, silent, orderly, perfect. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. Somewhere in the lower hall, faint footsteps echoed. Then Drakon's voice, low, controlled, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "She's strong-willed," he said, "but she'll adjust. They all do." Riva froze breath, trapped in her chest. He laughed quietly, then walked away, footsteps fading into the night. She stood there for a long time, staring into the dark, until the moon slid behind the clouds. For the first time since arriving, she wondered if her father's alliance had cost far more than he ever realized. Days slid into weeks. The Nightspire palace remained grand but cold. It reminded Riva of a golden cage, beautiful, but meant to keep things inside. At first she told herself it was only cultural difference. The South had its own rituals, its own expectations. She wanted to believe that needed to. Draken remained kind in public, smiling, attentive, careful in every gesture when others watched. But in private, something sharper sat beneath his words. The first time she truly noticed it was at breakfast when a young servant girl spilled wine while pouring for him. The girl froze, trembling. "It's all right," Riva said, reaching for a napkin. "It was an accident." But before she could touch the table, Draken caught Riva's wrist gently, but too controlled, and said, "No, my dear. Let her learn." He turned to the servant. "On your knees." The girl obeyed instantly, dropping to the floor and scrubbing the spill while whispering apologies. Riva's chest tightened. "That isn't necessary." Drakan smiled, still calm. "Everything here has purpose, Riva. She's just a girl. She's a woman," he corrected smoothly, "and without order packs collapse." He finished the sentence smoothly. "And women must be taught discipline early. Their purpose is to serve, not to challenge." His tone was easy, almost casual, but the words chilled her to the bone. When the servants hurried away, he leaned back and continued eating as if nothing unusual had happened. Later that day, Riva brought it up again. "You humiliated her in front of everyone. I corrected her," Draken answered. "Aluna should understand that. A pack survives on structure. The males lead." He paused just long enough for the meaning to sink in. "The females follow. That's how the moon shaped us." "The moon doesn't require cruelty," she whispered. A faint smile curved his lips. "The moon requires obedience." The pattern became harder to ignore as the days passed. When female servants spoke without being addressed, they were dismissed or punished. When Riva tried to voice an opinion during council meetings, Drakan's hand would tighten around her arm beneath the table, a silent warning. When she once suggested that a woman might train with the scouts, the room froze. "No one wants to see a woman with blood on her hands," Draken said lightly. "It's unbecoming." He said it with a grin that made the room laugh, everyone except her. And then came the whispers. Late at night, while she wandered the halls, she'd hear guards murmuring to each other. "He broke the last Luna's will within a month. That's what the South needs. A Luna who kneels, keeps the pack strong. That's why the moon blesses him." She began to understand obedience wasn't simply expected here. It was doctrine. The elders preached it. The servants breathed it. Even the silence seemed to carry it. One evening, she found Drakan in the library. He looked up from a thick, leather-bound book with the same calm he always wore. "You're quiet tonight," he observed. "I've been thinking," she said. "A dangerous habit." She ignored the joke. "Why is obedience everything here? Why must women stay silent?" He closed the book slowly. "Because silence preserves peace. When one voice rises against another, a pack fractures. Men carry the burden of leading. Women temper and nurture. That is balance." "That's not balance," she whispered. "That's fear. Fear keeps people alive." When she didn't answer, he added gently, "You'll understand after the ceremony." The words unsettled her deeply. The ceremony. He spoke of it constantly now, never revealing what it truly entailed, only that it would bind them before the pack and prove their unity. The night before, she attempted to write her father again. The ink smudged from her shaking hand, blurring across the page. As she sealed the letter, Draken entered the room. "You're writing late," he said, taking the folded note before she could hide it. "It's for my father. He should know I'm safe." He weighed the letter thoughtfully, then smiled. "Of course. But perhaps it's best to send it after the ceremony. When you're truly Luna, it will mean more. You'll send it?" Then she asked, "Of course." He slipped the letter into his pocket and kissed her forehead. "Rest, Riva. Tomorrow you become one of us." The following evening, a full moon climbed high over the southern courtyard. Hundreds of pack members filled the open square. Torches lined the stone path, flames flickering like anxious breaths. Riva's gown was heavy and white, threaded with silver. Vea dressed her in silence, her eyes rimmed red, her hands trembling. Vea Riva whispered, "What happens tonight?" The older woman's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Pray, Luna. Pray you please him." Before she could ask more, Draken appeared at the door. In the moonlight, he looked almost otherworldly composed, regal, impossibly assured. "Ready?" he asked. Her voice came out thinner than she expected. "Yes." He offered his arm. "Remember, everything tonight is for the good of both our packs, for your father's people." It took her a moment to hear the threat beneath the gentleness. She forced her head to nod. Of course not. The courtyard fell silent the moment they stepped inside. The pack formed two perfect rings, men in front, women behind them. At the altar, the elders stood waiting. One elder stepped forward, his voice surprisingly strong for his age. "By the moon's decree and the laws of the south, we gather to witness the claiming of the Luna. The Alpha commands, the Luna obeys, and through this, the bond is made sacred." A ripple of whispers drifted through the crowd. Riva's pulse hammered painfully. The elder continued. "Since the first howl, the moon set our order. Males to lead females to yield. Through surrender, harmony. Through obedience, peace." Riva stared at Draken. "You told me this was about unity." "It is," he said with a faint smile. "Unity, through obedience." His next words struck like ice. "Now kneel. I won't kneel to anyone." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she heard. "Then you damn your father's pack. The Shatterfang rogues wait for my word. All I have to do is step aside and your people will be dead before sunrise." Her breath caught. "You wouldn't." He smiled cold sharp. "Kneel and I won't have to." The elder lifted his hands. "Alpha the Luna resists. Shall we proceed?" "Yes," Draken said. A ceremonial whip was brought forward, its handle carved with silver runes gleaming under the moonlight. Riva's knees locked. "No, please, this isn't every Luna kneels," Draken said calmly. "It is the law." When she didn't move, he took the whip himself. The crack against stone made her flinch violently. "Do it," he whispered. Riva shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "You're not the man I thought you were." "I am exactly who I claim to be," he replied. "You just didn't listen." The whip cut through the air again. The pain was instant, blinding, ripping through her body. Gasps rippled through the pack, yet no one moved. No one dared. She fell to the ground, breath ragged and broken. "Draken," she whispered. "Please." He crouched next to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "This is for peace, Riva. For your father. For order." As blood slipped down her arm, everything became clear. There would never be peace here. Only domination. When the elder finally declared, "The Luna is bound," Riva was kneeling in the dirt, trembling uncontrollably. The pack bowed their heads. The whip fell silent, but the damage was done. Her pride, her voice, her trust shattered. Draken stood over her and smiled as if nothing had happened. "Now they'll follow you," he said softly. "Because they've seen you submit." She lowered her gaze because she had no choice, but deep inside something darker ignited. A quiet, burning vow. One day he would regret teaching her the power of silence. The days after the ceremony blurred into a haze of pain and stillness. Riva woke each morning with her back raw and burning, the scent of herbs and iron clinging to her sheets. The healers entered without speaking, laying ointments onto her wounds, avoiding her eyes. When she tried to speak, they bowed quickly and slipped out. During the first days, she cried when the door shut. By the end of the week, she didn't. Tears only made the silence heavier. Draken visited once. He stood at the foot of her bed, hands clasped behind him, wearing the same black uniform as always. "I asked them to be gentle with you," he said softly, as if expecting gratitude. "You'll heal soon." Riva's voice was hoarse. "Why did you do it?" He frowned slightly, like correcting a child. It's not what I wanted, Riva. It's what had to be done. Necessary, she whispered. You think the Frost Hollow Pack honors you because of your lineage. Down here, power must be shown. He stepped closer, lowering his tone. If I let you defy me publicly, they would have seen weakness. And weakness invites challenge. So you humiliated me to protect your pride, to protect order, he corrected, and by extension, your father's people. You remember our agreement. Riva froze. You said you wouldn't. I said I wouldn't need to. He brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve. Don't make me need to. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was somehow worse than his voice. By the second week, Riva could walk again. Her steps were slow and cautious, but steady. Every movement tugged fire down her spine, a living reminder of what he had done. One morning, Vea appeared at her doorway carrying a tray. She looked older, more shaken than Riva remembered. The Alpha requests your presence at supper, she said quietly. Requests, Riva asked dryly. Vea hesitated. Insists. That evening, the great hall glowed brighter than she recalled. Dozens of men filled the table, laughter booming, eyes drifting toward her as though waiting to see if she would flinch. She didn't. Draken rose when she entered. There she is, he said with a polished smile. Our Luna, strong again. Polite applause rippled through the room. Riva took her seat beside him, feeling the weight of every stare settle on her skin. When a servant poured her wine, Riva noticed the girl's trembling hands. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing dark bruises. Riva reached to steady the cup. Careful, she whispered. The girl flinched violently. Forgive me, Luna. Please. Draken chuckled, resting a hand on Riva's shoulder. She's skittish. They all are. You'll get used to it. Used to fear, Riva murmured. Used to discipline, he corrected. That's what keeps them loyal. He said it loudly, and the men around the table nodded approvingly. Riva kept her expression smooth and offered a faint smile. Of course, Alpha. Inside her stomach twisted. After dinner, she slipped away under the excuse of exhaustion. She found Vea waiting in her chamber, folding linens. You shouldn't speak kindly to them, Vea whispered once the door shut. It makes things worse. Riva frowned. Worse for them? Vea nodded. He notices. When you treat them like people, he punishes them later. That struck harder than any blow. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Vea looked at her fully, then really looked. Because those who tried aren't here anymore. Riva felt her throat tighten. Then where are they? Vea's voice dropped to a tremble. Buried or missing. We call them the void-marked. Riva let that settle. Women. Yes, mostly. Some servants. And some Lunas before you. Before Riva could ask more, footsteps echoed down the hall. Vea's face drained of color. He's coming. Say nothing. She vanished through the side door just as Draken entered. Riva, he said warmly, as though he hadn't terrified half the hall that night. I wanted to be sure you were resting. I am, she replied. He studied her face for a moment. Good. You seem calmer. I'm learning. His smile deepened. That's all I ask. He left then, satisfied. When the door clicked shut, Riva exhaled shakily. Her hands were still trembling. She sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to herself. I'm not learning. I'm waiting. From that night on, everything changed. She lowered her eyes when he spoke. She thanked him when he dismissed her. She smiled when servants flinched. Every polite gesture was a lie wrapped in softness. The guards started calling her the perfect Luna. But under the calm mask, she was watching, calculating. She learned which corridors the guards patrolled after dark, which doors locked from the outside, which servants vanished after punishment. She began asking questions that sounded harmless. Who prepared the council chamber? Where were the records kept? When did the elders meet? The answers were brief, whispered, but they formed a map in her mind. Then one afternoon, she followed Vea down a narrow back hallway and discovered the door to the lower cells, the place where silence began. Inside, the air hung damp and rotten. Women scrubbed the cold stone floors, their eyes empty collars etched with symbols. Some didn't look up at all. Vea whispered, "The Alpha says they're mad that the moon cursed them for rebellion." Riva's voice quivered. "They were punished for speaking, weren't they?" Vea nodded once. "Now you understand why we stay quiet." Riva looked at the women moving like ghosts, and something inside her shifted sharply. They called this order. She saw a cage disguised as order. That night, Riva wrote one line on a scrap of parchment, then hid it beneath the floorboard under her vanity. "He thinks I'm silent, but silence remembers." The night she found the women in the lower halls, Riva didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, their faces haunted her, pale, emptied of hope, moving like puppets with their strings cut. She had seen cruelty before, had witnessed death. But this was different. These women weren't dead. They were erased, and if she wasn't careful, she would become one of them. Over the next few days, Riva slipped back into the role of the obedient Luna. She attended dinners, smiled when expected, and stayed silent when the men spoke. To anyone watching, she was everything Dracon wanted. Soft-voiced, compliant, obedient to the bone. But beneath that mask, she began to assemble a plan. Every look, every footstep, every whisper, she treated them like pieces falling into place. She learned which servants shrank at Dracon's presence, which avoided the cellar door, which carried messages between the council and the elders. Vea helped her more than she realized. The older woman had mastered moving like a shadow, and Riva began mimicking her, learning to walk unseen, to speak without drawing attention. One afternoon, while Dracon inspected the border patrols, Riva slipped into the laundry hall under the pretense of helping fold linens. The women inside stiffened immediately. "You shouldn't be here, Luna," one whispered, eyes wide. "I wanted to help." The others froze, all glancing toward the door. One woman, her age, hair cropped, short, eyes hollow, with exhaustion, shook her head quickly. "Helping us will only hurt us." Riva lowered her voice. "I've seen the cells beneath the hall." The room went dead still. A woman dropped the sheet she was holding. Another whispered a prayer under her breath. The cropped-hair woman stepped forward. "You shouldn't speak of that place." "They're women," Riva said. "Not curses." "What did they do?" The woman hesitated. "They questioned the Alpha. Disobeyed their mates. Or spoke when told to remain silent." Riva swallowed hard. "And what happens to them?" "They disappear," the woman said flatly. "They become quiet." Over the next week, Riva returned several times with different excuses. Each time she brought something small, a piece of fruit, a scrap of cloth, a kind word. At first the women ignored her. Then one evening, the cropped-hair woman finally spoke. "My name is Serin," she said softly, glancing toward the door. "You shouldn't keep coming here. I have nowhere else to go." Serin studied her for a long moment. "If you're seeking allies, you won't find them among the men. But among us, maybe." That night, Serin led her through a hidden passage behind the laundry hall. The stone walls were damp and cold. They walked in silence until they reached a small chamber lit by a single candle. 5 women waited inside. None bowed. Serin nodded toward Riva. "She knows." One older woman spoke first. "What do you want from us?" Luna Riva hesitated. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I won't survive here alone." Their expressions softened slightly. "Then you want what we all want." They met again the next night and the night after. The women called themselves the Duskwoven. For years they had kept one another alive, stealing scraps of food for prisoners below, hiding bruises beneath sleeves, sabotaging little things when they could. Never enough to draw suspicion, but enough to make the pack's machine grind a little slower. "We can't fight him," Serin said one night. "Not openly." His men would kill us before we reached the gate. I'm not asking you to fight, Riva replied. Not yet. Then what are you asking? She looked around the circle, candlelight trembling across their faces. Information. Every whisper. Every schedule. Every trade and patrol route. If we can't beat strength, Riva said we'll use the one thing he'll never expect. Cunning Saren said with a faint smile. Cunning Riva repeated. And patience. Days turned into weeks again, but they no longer blurred. Each one had purpose now. Riva began to test the edges of her cage. Riva started making small, harmless mistakes, just to test how far Dracon's patience reached. A delayed dinner. A misplaced report. A gentle but pointed question, phrased sweetly enough to be dismissed. And he always noticed, but instead of anger, he gave her that same controlled smile. You're still learning, he would say. You'll get there. And she would lower her eyes, answering softly, yes, I will. Just not in the way he believed. Vea grew bolder as well. She began slipping notes beneath Riva's door lists of names. Delivery routes, coded symbols marking guard rotations. One note held only 3 words, Saren trusts you now. That same night, Riva found another message tucked beneath her dinner plate, written in an unfamiliar hand. The moon blesses the defiant. She looked across the hall and caught Saren's gaze for the briefest heartbeat before both turned away. Their rebellion wasn't loud. It wasn't reckless. It whispered beneath the pack's roar, quiet, careful, patient. But it was growing. For the first time since the claiming ceremony, Riva felt something close to hope. Not hope for rescue, not hope for forgiveness. Hope for revenge. Winter arrived late in the south, creeping in like a shadow, unwelcome at the table. Nights sharpened with cold, the air thick with chimney smoke and salt carried from the far reaches of the territory. Riva spent her evenings in her chamber, pretending to embroider as guards paced the halls outside her door. Every stitch was deliberate, every thread loop a plan. 2 months had passed since she first met the dusk woven. Their network had grown quietly, subtly, one coded phrase at a time, a folded scrap left in laundry bundles, a nod exchanged in passing. Small, fragile, like a candle against the wind, but it burned and that was enough. Dracon had begun traveling more often, long inspections along the borders. When he was gone, the halls felt lighter. Servants spoke quietly. Vea even smiled sometimes. But when word spread that he was returning, silence descended again, heavy, suffocating. One night, snow drifted outside the windows when Vea slipped into Riva's chamber. They're saying the Alpha met with the Shatterfang, she whispered. Riva's head snapped up. The rogue's Vea nodded. At the southern ridge. Saren, says a traitor overheard. He's promising them something. Riva's pulse quickened. Promising them. What Vea hesitated. She fears it's blood. Later that night, Riva found Saren in the lower corridor. You said you heard something about the Shatterfang. Saren's expression hardened. He plans to pull patrols from the Frost Hollow borders after thaw. Says he'll send his armies north to finish old business. Riva's blood turned to ice. The north is supposed to be his ally. Not anymore, Saren murmured. Not if this is true. Riva braced herself against the cold stone wall. Her father. Her pack. The alliance she had bled for, sacrificed everything for, was about to become the excuse for their destruction. How long until spring, she asked. 2 months, maybe less. Then we have 2 months to stop him. Saren stared at her. Stop him. He commands hundreds. Then we use what we have, Riva said. And what we know. The next few days blurred into calculated patience. Riva began folding strategic questions into conversation carefully, never twice, never with urgency. She asked about supply shipments, armory rotations, Dracon's travel routes. Dracon noticed. He always noticed. One evening as they sat before the fire, he poured her wine and said, You've been restless lately. I'm just trying to learn, she replied lightly. If I am to be Luna, I should understand how the pack functions. His smile was pleasant, his eyes razor sharp. A Luna doesn't need to understand how anything functions. She only needs to trust that her alpha does. I do trust you, she whispered. Do you? He asked, almost tender. The question lingered like smoke. When she didn't answer, he took her wrist thumb, brushing lightly across her skin. You think too much, he murmured, and you forget sometimes that your comfort here depends entirely on mine, and my comfort depends on loyalty. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, quiet, deliberate, and colder than any winter storm. After he left that night, Riva stepped into the hallway and found Sarin waiting in the shadows. He suspects, Sarin murmured. I know. We should stop meeting. Riva shook her head firmly. If we stop, everything dies with us. Sarin hesitated. Live like who? Riva's voice lowered, like the void marked. The next morning, a messenger from the border arrived, carrying a seal smeared with dried blood. Draken read the message during breakfast, his expression calm, almost bored. Shatterfang raiders attacked one of our patrols, he said aloud. Seems they're growing bold again. Riva set her cup down slowly. That's terrible. Yes, he said, though there was a flicker of satisfaction behind his eyes. Terrible but convenient. The Frost Hollow must answer for their weakness soon. Her stomach twisted. You can't mean... He turned toward her with a faint smile. You forget, my dear. Your father's pack owes me obedience. If I command, they'll march beneath my banner. Or they'll burn. Her vision wavered. He reached over and brushed a crumb from her lip as if they were discussing nothing more serious than the weather. Don't worry. Behave and they'll live. That night, Rava didn't sleep. The following day, she gathered Sarin and 2 dusk-woven inside the laundry hall. We don't have time, she whispered urgently. He's not preparing for defense. He wants war. Sarin frowned. If he's aligning with the Shatterfang, even warning the North may not change anything. It will. Riva said. My father needs to know. I'll send a message with the next traitor. Too dangerous. Everything is dangerous, Riva snapped softly. But if we do nothing, we die waiting. Sarin exhaled, then nodded. We'll help you. That night, Riva wrote by candlelight, her words sharp and fast. Father, the alliance is broken. Draken plans to strike by spring. The Shatterfang stand with him. Trust no envoy from the south. Guard the borders. Riva. She sealed the letter with a ring and handed it to Sarin. Give this to Kir when he leaves tomorrow. He's loyal, Riva asked. As loyal as fear permits, Sarin answered. Then tell him it's worth his life to deliver it. Sarin nodded and slipped away into the dark. 2 days later, Draken returned from the barracks earlier than expected. Riva was in the courtyard when he arrived, his horse snorting hooves, grinding dust into the stone. He dismounted, passed the reins to a guard, and approached her with that too smooth smile. Walking alone, he asked. I needed air. He studied her for a long beat. Strange. Vea says you've been writing letters again. Her heart stuttered. I write to my father sometimes. How thoughtful, he said. And you sent it through my couriers. Yes. Yes. His eyes flicked toward the guards, brief calculating before settling on her again. Good. You're learning protocol. He touched her cheek, outwardly tender, but his fingers pressed hard enough to make her jaw ache. Always remember, Riva. Every word you write passes through me. Every messenger reports to me. There are no secrets between an alpha and his Luna. Then he kissed her temple and walked away. That night, Riva sat on the edge of her bed shaking. If he intercepted the letter, Frost Hollow would be undefended. If he hadn't, he would soon realize she lied. Either way, time was collapsing around her. She rose and stared at her reflection, pale, composed eyes, dark with exhaustion. This ends with me, she whispered. Not with him. Thunder rumbled outside the first storm of the season, moving across the southern hills. Lightning flashed silver and violent, illuminating the courtyard. A storm was coming, but this time she would not be the one to kneel. The storm hit at dawn. Thunder rolled across Nightspire, rattling the walls and shaking loose dust from the beams. By noon the rain had faded, but the air smelled of iron and smoke. It felt like a warning, heavy, tense, alive. Riva stood at her window watching the courtyard below. Guards paced in pairs instead of alone. Servants whispered behind closed doors. Even the wolves in the kennels were uneasy, their howls slicing through the wind. Something in the Nightspire pack sensed what was coming. That morning, Riva met Sirin inside the chapel, beneath the great hall, a hollow, candlelit crypt where shadows clung to the walls. They knelt, pretending to pray until the guards finally drifted out. "Is it done?" Riva whispered. Serena nodded. "The wine is ready." Vea mixed the root powder into the casks reserved for the council table. "It won't kill them, but it'll weaken them long enough." Riva exhaled, steadying herself. "And the others?" "The Duskwoven are waiting in the laundry hall. We placed the oil where you instructed, near the torches." "Good!" Serin's voice trembled. "Once it begins, there's no returning to what we were." Riva met her gaze without wavering. "I tried turning back once. It nearly destroyed me. I will not make that mistake again." By late afternoon, the council began to gather. Drakon had summoned them regarding an urgent matter of alliance. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Alpha planned to announce his march on Frost Hollow. Riva played her role with perfect precision. She sat beside him at the long table, her expression serene, hands folded elegantly in her lap. The men around her drank deeply, laughing so loud the stone walls trembled. Draken rose, lifting his glass. "Brothers of the South," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "The moon has blessed us with discipline, strength, and order. But order must be sharpened by fire. When the snows melt, we march north." The council roared with approval. Riva smiled. Then the first man dropped his glass. Then another, and another. At first it looked like clumsiness until the coughing began. Harsh, ragged choking racked the table as the root powder took hold. Men doubled over, gasping faces, paling eyes widening with panic. Draken froze, his hand tightening around his cup. "What have you done?" he hissed. Riva rose slowly, her calm terrifying. "Exactly what you taught me," she murmured, maintaining order. He lunged, but the hall doors burst open before he reached her. Flames exploded through the entryway as oil-soaked torches toppled. Fire raced along the tapestries and across the floor. Screams tore through the corridors as the Duskwoven struck from every direction. Servants slashing guards with knives hidden in their aprons. Others breaking open the kennels. The wolves, starved, enraged, ripped free of their chains. Riva backed away from the flames as the heat scorched her skin. Guards Draken roared. "Find her!" But most of his men were choking or already burning. The scene unraveled into pure chaos. Smoke, bloodfire. Riva ran. She moved through the corridors like a phantom. The plan had been simple: light the fires, free the women, seal the exits. But nothing about this night was simple anymore. Bodies lay scattered across the halls, smoke clawing at her lungs. She pushed through the courtyard doors, and the cold night slammed into her like ice. Chaos reigned. Outside guards and servants clashed. Wolves sprinted across stone flames, clawed their way up the tower walls. The moon glowed high and merciless above it all, and at the center stood Drakon. He was bleeding from the temple, his coat torn, his eyes wild. When he saw her, he smiled, that same controlled, monstrous smile. "Did you think this would stop me?" he shouted. "You've only proven my point, Riva. Women bring ruin the moment they dare to rise." She stepped forward, firelight catching the edges of her face. "No," she said clearly. "Men like you bring ruin because you fear the women who refuse to kneel." He drew his blade, steel flashing in the flames. "I gave you power," he growled, "and you spat on it." "You never gave me power." she said, voice trembling but strong. You gave me a cage and called it love. He advanced. If you care for your father's pack, maybe I'll burn them first. Those were his final words. Riva moved before he could finish, snatching a fallen spear from the ground and driving it upward with every ounce of strength she had left. The blade sank between his ribs. His expression shifted shock pain and something disturbingly close to pride. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. Riva leaned close, her voice steady at last. The Luna kneels for no one. Riva twisted the spear, and Draken's final breath broke in his throat. The courtyard burned around her as the tower collapsed in a rain of sparks. Women screamed. Wolves howled. Flames swallowed stone, and for the first time since she arrived in the south, she wasn't afraid. She knelt beside Dracon's dying body, only long enough to whisper, "For everyone you broke." Then she rose and walked away. Vea ran toward her, through the smoke, dragging Saren by the arm. "We did it," Vea cried. "He's dead." Riva lifted her eyes to the sky, the rising smoke, the cold, indifferent moon. "No," she murmured. "He's finished. But we aren't done." They stood together while the Nightspire stronghold burned the flames, consuming years of fear and obedience. The dusk-woven gathered around her, their faces streaked with ash and tears. "What now, Saren?" asked. Riva's voice was calm, almost icy. "Now we rebuild, and this time no one kneels." By dawn the fires were dying. What once were golden halls were now blackened ruins. Riva stood alone in the courtyard, the spear still in her hand. The scent of smoke and blood clung to the morning air. For the first time since her wedding night, she took a full breath. It tasted like freedom. Dawn crept in quietly. No cheers, no triumph, just wind moving through broken stone and the soft crackle of fading embers. The courtyard, where orders once thundered, now lay silent, heavy with ash. Riva stood barefoot on the scorched stones. Dried blood coated her dress, and her hands trembled though the air was warm. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind pressed heavier than thunder. Vea approached first, limping more noticeably than before. "It's over," she whispered. Riva didn't turn. "Nothing's ever over. Not really." "The men are gone," Vea said. "The ones who survived fled into the woods. The Shatterfangs scattered before sunrise. And the women in the chapel, those who can stand, are tending to the wounded. The rest—" she hesitated. "They're trying to convince themselves this isn't a dream." Riva nodded. "Give them time." Vea studied her. "You should rest." "I can't." Why? Riva finally looked at her, eyes hollow, voice thin. "Because if I stop now, I'll start to feel it." Vea didn't ask what it was. She simply bowed and left. The sun climbed higher, its weak light stretching across ruined walls. Hours later, Saren found Riva near the well, her hands covered in soot as she hauled water for the injured. "You shouldn't be doing that," Saren murmured, though she didn't try to stop her. "Someone has to," Riva said. They worked in silence. The courtyard still smelled of ash and blood, but beneath it lingered something new, clean air unbound. After a long time, Saren asked, "What will you do now?" Riva stared toward the distant forest. "I don't know. But I can't go back north." "You could. Eldrick would take you in." She shook her head. "If I return, I become a reminder of failure, the broken Luna who lost her pack. They'll look at me with pity. I won't live under that gaze again." Saren nodded. "Then stay. The South needs a leader." "I'm not an alpha, maybe not by blood," Saren said softly. "But these women already follow you. You gave them freedom. That's more than any alpha has ever done." Riva smiled faintly. "Freedom isn't enough. It has to mean something." By nightfall, the surviving women gathered in the courtyard, bruised, blood-stained, but standing. Riva climbed the ruined dais, where she once knelt under the moon, with blood dripping down her spine. Now she stood tall. The moon hung bright above, washing silver light across every scarred face. When she spoke, her voice carried hoarse but steady. For years this place worshipped obedience. We were told silence was sacred, that women existed to serve, that pain proved devotion. The courtyard fell silent, every woman watching her. No more. The word echoed against the stone. From this night onward, Riva said, her voice cutting through the cold air, there will be no Alpha in Nightspire. No Luna chained to obedience, only equals. The moon never asked for our silence. It gave us voices, and we will use them. A murmur spread through the crowd, soft at first, then rising like a tide. Sarin stepped forward, tears shimmering down her soot-streaked cheeks. Then, "What do we call you?" she asked. Riva lifted her gaze to the moon, the same moon that had watched her suffer. Watched her bleed, watched her rise. Her voice was steady, unshakable. "Call me whatever you choose, but remember this. No woman here will ever kneel again." Later that night, when the courtyard finally emptied, Riva walked alone through what remained of the once mighty pack house. She passed the shattered chamber where Drekon used to hold council, the scorched table where men once drank and laughed, while women bowed their heads. On one of the charred walls, the old Nightspire motto still clung to the stone beneath the soot. Obedience is strength. Riva ran her fingers across the words, then picked up a piece of broken charcoal and carved a new phrase beneath it. Freedom is strength. The stone cracked under her touch, but she didn't stop until the old motto was scraped away. As dawn spread across the horizon, the wind swept through the ruins, cool, clean, unbound. Riva stood at the edge of the courtyard one final time, the ashes behind her and the open world waiting ahead. Embers glowed faintly in the rubble like dying stars collapsing into darkness. She closed her eyes and whispered into the morning air, "They called me Luna, but I was born Alpha." Then she stepped forward barefoot into the rising sunlight, leaving smoke chains and Nightspire behind her forever.